Shalom, I'm Shira Berkovitz, and I'm really glad to be here today to discuss inclusive strategies for your youth department. Allow me to begin by introducing you to the story of a young friend of mine with special needs. David is 10 years old and he has severe autism. About a few weeks before the start of the school year, David's shul began advertising a special kickoff program that was going to take place on the afternoon of the first week of youth groups. They put out a flyer which featured a picture of children with their arms around each other, smiling. And it read, "Calling all children. Join us between Mincha and Mariv as we kick off the youth year with a special Oneg Shabbat. Parents, need a little Oneg yourselves? This program is perfect for all children. And kids, trust us, you don't want to miss it. This is the place to be for every kid in town." Well, David's parents were really excited. David was unable to attend formalized morning youth groups, but he can certainly benefit from the camaraderie and the soulful singing of other children his age. As the Shabbat approached, that would be the kickoff, David's family began to prepare with him. They spent a long time with him, making sure that he knew the name of the program director and all the other children that would be there so that he could transition in a little more smoothly. The Shabbat arrived and David and his family, his entire family, walked over to the shul. They saw the classroom and they saw a bunch of children sitting around and playing a game with the program director. David got excited and he walked in, bouncing on the tips of his toes and gently flapping his hands. His parents stood behind him and smiled. They waited. But nothing happened. No one approached them. No one made eye contact. No one even looked up. Finally, after several minutes, the program leader did come over to them. He looked into David's eyes. He looked David over, and then he looked at the parents and said, "I'm sorry. I don't think this is the right program for your child." David's parents clutched David's trembling hand in theirs, and in their other hand, they crumpled this flyer, which screamed, calling all children, and with slumped shoulders, they walked home. While David's family was hurt by this incident, they weren't surprised. The response the youth director gave is pretty common. Many of you might even understand where that youth director was coming from. Shul youth directors are chronically overworked, underpaid, and their youth department is understaffed and financially constricted by low budgets. I'm often asked by youth directors, why does it matter if one child isn't serviced on a Shabbat morning? The answer, David and thousands of other Jewish children like David are not just being asked to stay home from shul on Shabbat morning, but they are repeatedly excluded by Jewish communal programs that parents typically take for granted and consider indispensable, like school and camp. And instead, they find the secular organizations to be more welcoming and far less demanding. And we are rapidly losing children to these organizations and losing their families along with them. If you're not yet convinced about the importance of programming to include every single child, then I urge you to read the 2009 op-ed by Rabbi Dov Linzer and Devorah Zlatchauer, titled "Invisible Disability Kids Are Being Left Out," which can be found on Rabbi Dov's blog. It's time for us to stop paying lip service to inclusivity. If we are actually serious about professionalizing experiential education, which was a pretty hot topic at this year's YouthCon, then youth directors must join informal educators in becoming sensitized to and proactive about inclusive programming. Once we do, exclusive and hurtful statements just aren't acceptable. This webinar will provide you with a practical guide towards creating a youth department that is truly inclusive of every child. Specifically, I'll be discussing community resources, meeting the special needs families in your community and determining their needs, creating a welcoming and safe environment, specific programs and Shabbat groups, and food allergies. The first thing I'll say is, remember that this is a community issue, and many people want to help, primarily because youth directors are so overworked. You have to focus on Shabbat morning, programs, training your leaders, and teen activities, just to name a little bit of what you're doing. And because you as a youth director are so overworked, you shouldn't have to go it alone. Mine the resources that already exist in your community and use them as support. For starters, reach out to community experts, people that you might know who are psychologists, special education teachers, or learning specialists. These people might be willing to come forward and take on some of the burden. Perhaps they'll form a committee of other parents who want to help you, or they might even go so far as to lead a special needs group for you. They might help you develop a special needs curriculum. They might consult with you as problems arise. One specialist once offered to provide sign language interpretation for a deaf student. There are countless ways that experts within the community can help you, but you need to reach out to them. And so the first step is to do your research, find out who's out there. Also, you can reach out to other organizations. Plenty of organizations offer grants, resources, and support staff who will consult with you. For a list of these resources, see the sheet attached to this webinar, and you can go through it and contact them at your leisure. Just to give you an example of what exists out there, local federations often have grants for this sort of thing. One local organization told me that they lost a grant they had for special needs programming because no one in the community was using the money. And so the money was there, but nobody was asking for it. So today, let's decide to program for all children, and let's reach out to the resources that are there to help us. Once you've done your research, you want to call a meeting with the rabbis, the clergy, the board, and any other synagogue professionals, such as executive directors and secretaries. Get them on board. Talk to them about your thoughts for inclusive programming and why you think this is important. Before you can go any further, you need to have the full support of the entire team. It's not going to be easy. There's a lot of work to do. And so if you're doing it alone, it's just too much. But if the rabbi and the board and everybody else supports you, this will be okay and you can do it. Once you have them on board, the very first step is to call a meeting for parents of children with special needs. Don't just call it by announcing it in your shul bulletin. Advertise it widely so that everybody's heard of it. And by widely, I mean it should be in your school newsletters, put an ad in the local newspaper, community listservs, social media. You want to get the word out everywhere you can. We're having a meeting for parents of children with special needs. Come on down. And the reason you want to do this is because A, you want to be very clear about your commitment to this issue and make sure that you're reaching as many people as possible. And B, because you don't know who's out there. Youth directors often say to me, Shira, you want me to work on inclusion programming? I only have 1 or 2 kids in the entire community with special needs. In fact, I used to think that myself. And then when I called a meeting in my community, I found roughly 20 children with real serious special needs who were not being serviced. I was blown away. The families are out there, but they're in the woodwork and they're discouraged and they need encouragement to come out and to seek your help and to try once again. Once you've advertised this in print, start with personal invitations. Use phone, use email, and call the people in the community that you do already know about that have children with special needs. Ask others if they know of people in the community and reach out to them and say, hey, we have a meeting going on. It's really important that you're there, and it would mean a lot to me if you would come. And if they're slightly resistant because they've tried in the past and it hasn't worked, encourage them and tell them that you're really committed to this. Then reach out to community experts that you know and invite them to the meeting, and consider partnering with schools and other shuls and local and national organizations, at the very least, just to help you get the word out about this meeting. Because this meeting is your starting point and you go from here, this is where you want as much advertisement as possible so that you know what you're dealing with. At the meeting itself, begin by introducing yourself. Share your broad goals very briefly, and then ask the families, the parents around the table, to introduce themselves briefly for about 30 seconds. Know that this is likely going to be an unhappy group of parents. They'll be angry because in the past, and for so many years, they've felt unheard, isolated, and completely overwhelmed. That's okay. Just know it and be prepared for it. Be a sympathetic listener, but don't feel intimidated by their anger. Understand where they're coming from. And again, don't bear the brunt of their anger by yourself. Bring in the rabbi and the board to help support you. Acknowledge the difficulties they've encountered and acknowledge your own limitations. If you don't know a lot about special needs, say so and tell them that you need their help, that they are the experts on their children, and that together, and only together in a partnership, can this program succeed. By investing, the parents will see rewards, but they cannot just come to the meeting and complain, and they rightfully have a lot to complain about. Once you've moved past that part of processing all the hurt that already exists, move on to practical suggestions of what you can do to help them. Start by asking parents, what do you want to see most? If there was one thing you want from the shul for your child, what is it? And then brainstorm with them some ideas that you've had. Toss out suggestions and see how they react to these suggestions. Give out roles to parents. Assign them to different tasks at that meeting already to help transition into implementing the program. Finally, once this meeting is complete, your job with meetings is not over. Make sure that you follow up this meeting by meeting with every single child. Ask the children what they're afraid of. Ask them what they enjoy. Get to know them. A label, a diagnosis doesn't tell you who a child is. So after you've met the family, make sure that you or somebody else, a community member, a resource, somebody who's working with you on this project, meets every single child before the program launches. After your meeting, you'll begin to have a sense of who's out there and what the special needs of your community are. There are so many special needs in the community. To list some of them, physical disabilities, which can impact mobility, hearing, vision, and speech. Invisible disabilities, which refers to children who appear to be functioning and unimpaired. They're often verbal, sometimes very articulate. They can be of average intelligence or low, or extremely high intelligence. At first glance, these children don't appear to have special needs, but invisible disabilities can include sensory, learning, social, mood, behavioral, or personality disorders. and they certainly include developmental disorders such as autism spectrum disorders. There are also cognitive disabilities, children who have transitional issues, and perhaps most overlooked, even though it's most common, are food allergies. To create an inclusive youth department, you don't need to become an expert on all of these different categories, but you do need to have a general awareness of them so that when you're running your youth department, you're more likely to identify these special needs when you see them and to be able to think of accommodations that you can provide. I'll begin now by discussing broad strategies for inclusivity, and after I'll provide tips for specific programming and special needs. Remember, to create a welcoming youth department, that message needs to be loud and clear. On your PR materials, your mission statement, your websites, announcements, emphasize that inclusion is important to you. Even if you don't have accommodations ready for a specific program, invite the conversation. Tell parents to contact you if there are individual needs that their child has. If your shul is wheelchair accessible, for example, the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale has a ramp leading up to their bima, then make sure you talk about this and you mention this and include that information everywhere. It should be on every single flyer. Not only does this provide information to families with special needs, but it also sends a message of welcome and sets the tone for an inclusive youth department. I'd like to ask you to step back for a minute and think of yourself as a young child in grade school. What was the hardest part of your day? Most people will probably say math or science. Some might even say sitting still for a very long time. But for some children, recess is the hardest part of their day. Recess, where they're let loose in a busy place that they just don't know how to navigate. Well, shul can be like one big recess. If you don't have youth groups, if your youth groups are one big playtime, or even if you do have good structured youth groups, the before and the after can be chaotic, can be overwhelming, it's certainly loud, there are a lot of names to learn, and for a child with special needs, they can feel new in the synagogue environment for a very long time. The adaptations that you can implement in your youth department to help these children will, for the most part, benefit every single child. For example, organization and substantive curriculum development are absolutely necessary for any successful quality program. However, they're especially crucial when dealing with children of special needs. So let's talk about organization. The very first thing a parent of a child with special needs is going to look for before dropping off their child, indeed most parents will look for this, is the safety of your program. They cannot buy into your program unless they feel reassured that your program is safe and organized. Here are some tips of things that you can do to make your youth program safe. First, your leaders need to be trained in how to be a good leader, trained in how to deal with behavioral issues, but especially they should be CPR trained and trained in evacuations. Now, if you don't have the resources to provide training for every single leader, pick 1 or 2 or 3 leaders who receive this special training and are always on site. 2, the doors of your classrooms should have windows in them. Parents should be able to look inside the windows. Passerby should be able to look inside. Everybody should feel secure knowing that they can at any point see what's going on in that classroom. There should be a zero tolerance policy for bullying. This is important for the parents and especially for the children. Children with special needs are often the #1 targets of bullies, and so are children with food allergies. You need them to feel totally safe and protected when they enter the youth group. To accomplish this, sit down with each youth group and come up with a list of rules that the children help you compile. Then, once you have these rules, put them on the wall in a very clear and visible way. Make sure that there are clear consequences for every single rule, that the children know what to expect, and that these rules are communicated to the parents. But don't just put rules about what not to do, like hurting others. Also put rules about things that children can do, like make new friends and tell jokes. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, is knowing who comes to your youth group. You would be hard-pressed to find any youth group, any drop-off center for any youth program in New York City, or probably any big city or town in the country that accepts drop-off children and doesn't know the names of the children, doesn't know how to contact those parents, and really doesn't know who's there on any given day. You just won't find it because it's irresponsible and it's not safe. I know, you'll tell me that you can't write down on Shabbat mornings. However, you can be a little creative and work past that. Start by asking parents to register in advance of youth groups. Require it. Say that if your child comes 3 times and isn't registered, on that 4th time they won't be accepted. I know, that sounds exclusive, but it's exclusive for one Shabbat. They're welcome back the next Shabbat. They're given 3 chances to register. And it's ultimately for their safety. So require that parents register their child. Then make sure that they list their allergies and any special needs. This is also a really good way to find out who's out there. And you'll be surprised at what you find. Once you have this registration list, get creative. You can take popsicle sticks and write down the name of every single child on a popsicle stick. Have a cup that says at home, and then another cup that says here at shul. When the parents come to drop off their child, let them take the popsicle stick from the at home cup and place it in the here at shul cup. This way, if there's an emergency evacuation, the leaders can take the children on their way out the door, grab the popsicle sticks in the here at shul, and when they get outside, they can start reading off those popsicle sticks like an attendance roster. You can be creative with this, and you can use name tags that hang on hooks. You can have little leaves on an Eitz Chaim, a tree of children, and each child has a leaf with a picture of themselves so that it's welcoming to them. And when they walk in the door, you put it on the tree. There are all sorts of ways, with Velcro, and there are all sorts of ways to work this out. But the key is that you need to be responsible and know who's there. In a larger shul, you can use the popsicle stick system in a little bit more of an elaborate way. You can have a board that has different pockets for the different services going on in your synagogue. And so when a parent drops off their child, they take the popsicle stick and place it in a pocket that either says women's side of the main sanctuary, or Tat Shabbat, or men's side of learner's service. And this way, if there is an issue with your child, particularly if you have special needs, you'll know right away where you can find that parent in a big synagogue. More towards the organization end is having a clearly planned curricula for all the age groups. If you don't have this, you can't have a quality program. The structure is important, the schedule is important. I won't spend any more time talking about this because if you're interested in how to create a curriculum for Shabbat morning youth groups, please see my talk from last year's YouthCon on interactive programming. However, I do believe that having a good quality program is absolutely essential to the success of any youth department, and of course, to incorporating special needs children into that youth department. Once you have this curriculum and you have a schedule, post it on the wall so that every child can see what's going on and when. It can be in the form of a clock with pictures. It doesn't need to have words or numbers, and they can move the arrow as they get to each new activity. But make sure that kids know at all points what's going on. Also important is setting up the physical space. Minimize the distractions. The periphery of your classroom should never be competing with the attention of the teacher. If a child is sitting in the group and there are toys all over the room, even a child without special needs is going to have a very hard time focusing on the teacher. If there are parents talking on the side of the room, kids will have a hard time focusing. Many youth departments share space with a classroom. In those instances, you may have desks and chairs all around the room that you can't put away. Well, then see if you can fold them up, or stack them, or move them to one side of the room and put a mechitza in front of them. Whatever you do, try to minimize the distractions. This is especially true for children with special needs. It's also important to put out chairs when you're doing a group activity. This might seem very detail-oriented and not important, but in fact, if you put a child with special needs on the floor and you say, sit here, that's really hard for them to do. And there's a lot of wiggling that can go on. They might be getting up and running all around. They might have trouble with the kids sitting next to them. Having a chair gives them a space that's their own, that they can be in, that they can sit in. And this is true, again, for all children. One thing you can do, if you're finding that you're having a hard time teaching a class, but you know you have a great program prepared, you just don't have a chance to get there because the kids don't stop talking or acting out or horsing around with each other. You might start by labeling the chairs with the children's names. Try to preempt as many problems as you can. And you can have fun with it. Don't just label their names. Decorate each chair for each child, and then strategically place the chairs in a circle the way you want it. Intersperse youth leaders amongst the children so you don't have all your youth leaders clumped together. If there are children who always talk to each other, don't put their chairs next to each other. Then, when the children walk into the room, encourage them to find their own chairs. This becomes exciting, and it's a positive approach. The children walk in, they see their chair decorated with their name, and they feel like they have a space in that classroom. Again, you can only do this if you actually know which children are in your classroom. But assuming you do, you've now preempted an entire issue. You can get straight to your program, and you don't have to waste time switching children into different seats, arguing with them, engaging in a power play, and really thwarting their will for your own, which becomes completely unnecessary if you just preempt the problem. Finally, try to use quiet voices. Sometimes when people work with children with special needs, they think that they need to talk really loudly or scream to be heard, when in fact, a quiet, calm voice can be just as effective or probably more effective. Likewise, your hallways should be really clear and calm. If your hallways are chaotic, there are kids running all around the place, the parents are talking to each other and schmoozing, and a child with special needs, or a child who's timid, or a child who doesn't want to go to youth groups walks onto that floor, that's a really intimidating space to walk into. Not to mention that it's unsafe, because you wouldn't even know if you lost a child into that chaos. But if a child walks on to a calm, clear floor with one person there to greet them and say, welcome, let me show you to your group, and call them by name, that's a much different environment, and it's much easier to transition into groups. Finally, try to be prepared. Many of these children with special needs do not attend Jewish schools. That puts them at a disadvantage. They don't know other children at shul, and they don't know as much information about Judaism, Shabbat, holidays. Previewing can go a long way with these children. Preview the materials, preview the groups. If you have windows in the classroom doors, you can show these children what groups look like before you throw them into the classroom. And remember, you can transition in slowly, so they can sit on the side of the classroom and watch with their parent if they would like. On one week, they can come in just for a few minutes, and then the next week's a few minutes more. Don't throw a child in all at once. Try to prepare them as much as possible. Go over the schedule with them. Give them their own printed out schedule with a paper clip that they can move the paper clip throughout the morning to keep track of what's going on. Teach them one or two things that will be covered in groups that week so that they can raise their hand and feel good about knowing what's going on. Perhaps most importantly introduce them to another child in advance with the assistance of the parent, so that when that child, who might be in public school all week, walks into the classroom and a kid calls out, "Hey Sam, come on in!" Suddenly, walking into that classroom got a whole lot easier. Shabbat morning youth groups are a great place to start your special needs inclusion programming because they're consistent. They happen every week, which means that if something doesn't go right the first week, you can always work on it the next week, and children have a chance to transition in smoothly. Here are some ideas for ways to incorporate special needs children into your programming for Shabbat morning. There are essentially two types of groups that you can make. One is a special needs group, and the other is an inclusion group, and it depends on the children in your community and what they need. Let's talk about a special needs group first. Call it something else other than special needs. You might call it Kol HaYiladim for a younger group, and Kol HaNe'arim for an older group, if your community is large enough to have two groups. Ideally, the special needs group should have a teacher, a special education teacher, who comes prepared every week and is experienced with this population so that they can tailor the program to those children's needs. I realize, though, that this is not always practical and that there aren't always resources or even the right people around to be able to do something like this. If you can't get a professional in the classroom, then think about a rotation of parents. Many shuls that are implementing Tat Shabbat, a different program, begin their Tat Shabbat, which ends up being incredibly successful in this same manner with a parent rotation. And for Tat Shabbat, also it's better to have a professional, but if you can't, just to get it going, a parent rotation can work. And that has been wildly successful in communities across North America and even around the world. So why not try that here? Reach out to the parents, the same parents who are asking you to help them program for their child, and say to them, "Listen, I want to help you. I have a great idea. The only thing is, I don't have a person to lead the group. I need you to lead the group 2 or 3 times a year. That's it. But that means that every single other week, I'll be able to have a program for your child." Obviously, doing this means that the quality of the program will fluctuate somewhat. Some parents will be better than others, and that's okay. At least you're getting the program going. If you can't get the program up and running every week, have the program run once a month. Maybe schedule it around Chagim, or schedule it on Rosh Chodesh, but make sure that you're meeting these children's needs. And if you have to create a special needs group that has parents, it will be great also. And the parents are really invested in making sure that this works. So they're good people to reach out to. You can also reach out to volunteers in the community. There are plenty of people who want to see this happen. They want to make sure that every child has a place in the synagogue. So reach out to those parents and non-parents alike to find out who they are. And again, this would be a place to tap into experts in the community and any grants that are available. The other type of group that you can create is an inclusion group. I ran an inclusion group for 3rd through 4th graders. How did that come to be? We called a meeting to find out who's out there in the community. And it just turned out that most of the children with special needs of invisible disabilities were in 3rd and 4th grade and were boys. So it just made sense to make the entire 3rd and 4th grade group an inclusion group. The typically functioning kids didn't know this, and the special needs children didn't know this, but the parents knew this. And it took a little bit of time to get off the ground, but it was a phenomenal success by the end of the year. And it was so good, not just for the special needs children, but for the typically functioning children as well, who learned that in addition to children coming in all shapes, sizes, colors, they also come at all functioning levels. And even though they weren't told that this was an inclusion group, they can tell that there were different ways that different children functioned, and that was okay. To run a successful inclusion group, you'll need to have shadows in the room. Depending on the needs of the children, you can have shadows for every child or shadows for every 2 or 3 children. Certainly with more severe disabilities, you'll need to have one-on-one shadows. Where do you get your shadows? Once again, reach out to the community. See if there are volunteers. Talk to a parent. That's a great free way to get a child into group. The parent might be really willing and even very much want to be in the room with their child. Ideally, of course, you want to get a professional shadow in the group. Again, the way to do this is either through grants or through donations from people who care in the community, or you can try splitting it half and half. So if a professional costs $40 an hour, you can try saying the shul will pay $20 an hour and the family should pay $20 an hour. Again, you might say, that's a big investment for one child. But I assure you that the message you send to the entire community by providing that service is very profound and will go much further than just your youth department. The last place, but probably the first place you should check for a shadow, is amongst your youth group leaders. Those teenagers who aren't natural leaders, who don't quite have the charisma or the confidence to stand up in front of the entire room, they might be perfect shadows. They can end up being your quiet stars and working one-on-one with the children, developing a very special relationship. When you send a child into an inclusion classroom, make sure that you know their trigger points. For example, I once had a child who was going into a junior congregation who was very worried about what the other children would say about animals. Animals were his thing. And if other children said things that were not nice about animals or didn't show proper respect to animals, that would set him off. And he was very, very concerned about what the other children would say. I was so glad to have that conversation because then I could go into the classroom and have this conversation with the youth leaders, with the teachers, and even with the other children, making sure that everybody was sensitive about animals. Likewise, another child with autism was set off by sneezing. And so anybody who sneezed would really disorient this child, and the child would no longer be able to focus or sit in the group circle. Knowing this in advance meant that we were able and ready to meet this need if it ever arose. What happens when a child ages out of youth groups? I'll tell you the story of Ellie. Ellie was 14 years old with invisible disabilities. Ellie's been lucky in that he grew up in a synagogue that met his needs. They provided a shadow for him to attend youth groups and even an inclusion classroom as he was growing up. But Ellie is 14 now, and he no longer goes to youth groups. Most of the children Ellie's age are going to either Teen Minion or they're becoming youth group leaders. The problem is that Ellie was completely lost at Teen Minion. And when he applied for a youth leader position, the youth director, who knew him and accommodated him all these years, rejected him because he didn't think he would be able to handle the job of youth leader. Ellie is becoming increasingly resentful and bitter towards synagogue, where he feels he has no place, towards the community, which he feels excluded him, and towards Judaism, which, like other teens, he views as restrictive. We can avoid this situation. Let's talk about Teen Minion. For any child coming from junior congregation or youth groups, to switch into Teen Minion is a big transition. It's something they might be worried about, or for many of them, they might not even do it. So they'll go through the youth groups and then they fall off the map, and you'll find them in bathrooms, in parking lots, all over the building, but not in Teen Minion, not in shul with their parents, and not davening. So one thing that you can do is create a big sibling transition program. Pair up the children who are graduating from youth groups with a child or a teenager in Teen Minion who's already been there for a year or two. Let them meet in advance, get to know each other, send them out to ice cream, and then when they come to Teen Minion, let them sit next to each other, at least for the first few weeks. Let the older child assist the younger child with the tefillot. Let them tell them what's going on in advance, and during tefillah, let them be there for them. That's great for any child, but especially a child with special needs. If they had a big sibling with them, every step of the way, the transition is so much easier. For the children with special needs who want to be youth group leaders, have an open mind. First, they can always do specific tasks. So for example, they can be great snack leaders, really responsible, really detail-oriented, and making sure that everything goes according to plan. However, some of these kids are great in the classroom too. The difficulties, especially the social difficulties they might have with children their own age, tend to disappear with younger children who look up to them, see them as smarter, cooler, fun. One child I know is fantastic with really young children. He walks into the room and they think he is king of the classroom. Don't exclude a child like that. Allow them to be a youth group leader, but provide the resources they need to do so in a responsible fashion. Have a shadow in there with them in the beginning to transition them, to model correct behavior, to give them pointers and tips. Then when the shadow isn't there anymore, have somebody around. Make it okay for them to take a break when they need to walk out of the room. And if you can't do that, then maybe find some creative way that they can be there even just for one child, or even in the classroom just to hand out the snacks or to help hand out the sidurim. But find a way to include them and you'll probably be surprised how much they actually can handle. Let me tell you about Sarah, a shy, sweet, inquisitive 8-year-old girl that I knew. Sarah has airborne and contact allergies to dairy. This means she can't touch it, she can't breathe it, and if she ingests dairy, she could die. When she and her parents asked the youth director in her community to eliminate dairy from the menu, the youth director responded, "What? You want me to do all that for one child?" I get that making any change is complicated. To buy food for youth groups, you have to start by having it kosher, affordable, healthy, in bulk, delivered. There are so many considerations that go into purchasing your food, and so I understand that this is not a simple request. But if you could do something as small as eliminating dairy from your youth groups, and that will allow Sarah and all the other children like her to come to Shabbat morning youth groups, how can you not? Again, Sarah, you might not think that Sarah has a special need, but a food allergy like that is a special need. And chances are, children like Sarah may not be able to be in a regular mainstream school. Sarah is actually in a special needs school, in public school, that will accommodate her food allergies better than the Jewish schools have been able to do so. So make sure that when she comes to shul, she's not excluded there as well. Here are some things you can do to accommodate children with food allergies. First, when you start with a registration list and you ask parents to register, you're asking them to list the allergies that their children have. I was astonished when I did this to discover that I had 45 children in Shabbat morning youth groups with food allergies. I had no idea. Sure, I knew about the more serious ones, but I didn't know that I had 45 children with allergies. And so what you do is you then print out a list of all the children that have allergies, and this gets hung up on the snack closet. Then for each classroom, you print a list of the children in that classroom and that have allergies and what those allergies are. Make sure to check with the parents first that they're okay, that you're not violating any privacy issues, but assuming they are, and most are, hang that list up in the classroom as well, so that every leader knows what the allergies are in that classroom. Then, make sure you train your youth group leaders. Train them by telling them who has allergies, make sure they have that memorized, make sure they know what those allergies are, and make sure they know what to do in case of an allergic reaction. If there's an EpiPen involved, make sure they know how to use an EpiPen and that they've been trained on the right way by the parent or some other professional. Your snack leader should be trained on what the allergies are. And then you should accommodate the allergies by not buying food that would exclude children from your youth department. Now, if the allergy is a benign one or almost benign and it's in an older child, that doesn't mean you need to exclude that particular food from the entire youth department. Perhaps you'll just provide an alternative for that one group, or perhaps that child really doesn't care. Maybe they can't have gluten, but they don't like challah anyhow, and they're just as happy to have all the other snacks that you provide. Find out, talk to that family, and find out how that child feels. But for children with severe allergies, make sure that that food is just nowhere to be found in your kitchen and in your youth department. If the allergy is so severe that the child can get a reaction from contact or air, you need to take extra precautions. With one group and one child who was deathly allergic to dairy, what we did was we had the children, before they entered the room, use wipes. The leaders wiped down their hands and they wiped down the mouths of the children. Because even if the children weren't bringing food into the room, if they had just had a bowl of cereal with milk at home, it might be all over their hands. At first, the children didn't enjoy doing this, but once they realized that this was the standard for that group, and every single child had to do it, they just didn't care. It became part of the routine. And they were also allowed to go to the bathroom with their parent and wash their hands with soap and water there. We had the maintenance staff trained to wipe down all surfaces in the room on a weekly basis before Shabbat, the tables, the door handles, to make sure that this child was safe, protected, and welcome. Other health concerns related to food are obesity, cavities, diabetes. In general, try to send a healthy, positive message about nutritious foods instead of stuffing kids with candy all the time. As a synagogue, it's important that we send these healthful messages. Many parents are very careful about the foods they feed their children at home. So for them to come to youth groups and see candy might be a turnoff, and that might exclude those children. If a parent has a child that's obese and they're working so hard all week on a diet at home, and then they come to shul and see all their friends gorging on candy, how can that child come to youth groups? So exclusion can happen in many ways, and inclusion requires sensitivity and finding out what the needs are of the children in your community. Finally, let's talk a little bit about programs that are outside of Shabbat morning and how you can accommodate children through youth department programming. Common triggers for children with special needs are loud, crowded, and busy areas. Amplification of music is sometimes just over the top for them, and so you want to avoid it whenever possible. That being said, that means that Simchat Torah, Purim, carnivals, all of these are going to pose problematic for children with special needs. That doesn't mean you have to exclude these programs from your activities, from your schedule for the year. But it does mean that you should be aware and be sensitive. There are some ways in which you can adapt the programs. For example, I once ran a Yom HaAtzmaut festival. It was a Renaissance fair on the street to the times of the Beit HaMikdash, and there were 1,000 people present. That's a lot of people. That means that a child with special needs is going to have trouble walking into that program. But I also made sure that the activities at that program focused on multi-sensory stimulation. So the very first thing the children encountered when they walked onto that street was an excavation dig that was going to take them back in time. That excavation dig was a giant sandbox, and so the kids got to feel the sand, sort through the sand, and look for precious artifacts. Then the children got to stamp on grapes and make their own grape juice with their feet. They wore plastic bags in a giant swimming pool full of grapes. Children got to hear harp music softly playing and learn how to play harp. They got to make hummus fresh and eat it, taste it. After the program, so many parents of children with special needs came over to thank me for engaging their children at their levels in so many different ways. Whenever possible, aim for a full body experience. Again, this is not unique to children with special needs. Visual stimulation and full body stimulation is really ideal when possible. Think about tefillah. Think about the ways in which you can be creative. Don't just sit there and have children mumble words, but instead make the tefillah interactive. Intersperse sitting down times with standing up times. Let the children get up to wash netilat yadayim. Do a Torah parade and dance. Act out Berkovitz HaShachar, which was how they were originally intended to be said anyhow. Again, for more suggestions like this, listen to the talk I gave at YouthCon last year on inclusive programming. However, just as a broad idea, keep this in mind that you want to engage children as much as possible through all of their senses. You can also be flexible by allowing children to switch into different age groups. Think about Tat Shabbat or whatever your parent-child program is in your community. If there's an older child who doesn't want to separate from their parent, don't make them separate from their parent. Instead, invite them to join the Tat Shabbat, where they can sit together and have a good time. If a child with special needs has severe cognitive disabilities, so maybe you have a 15-year-old child, where even though Tat Shabbat is typically geared to 2- and 3-year-olds, why don't you invite that child in? Tat Shabbat, which has singing, no amplification, no musical instruments, but just sweet voices of children, might be the perfect fit for that child and his parent. If you're creating an arts and crafts program, maybe you don't need to put an age limit on it. Or if you do feel that you need to put an age limit, maybe you can rate 1st and 2nd graders, and any child above 2nd grade that would like to join is welcome. Because truthfully, no 5th grader is going to want to come unless it's a 5th grader or a 10th grader or an older child with special needs, and this is really the perfect program for that child. So try to think through your wording, and if you don't need to put an age limit, don't do it. Another program you can try is a Suda Shlishit, special for children with special needs and their families. I used to run this between Mincha and Mariv. Families were welcome into the bayit, and they would walk in and come into the main sanctuary, where we would do a mini Mincha service. This Mincha service included a story from the rabbi or from myself, and afterwards we brought all these children up onto the bima, where the Torah was taken out, and they got an opportunity to touch the wooden handles, to kiss the Sefer Torah, and even to take the yad and point to the different letters in the Sefer Torah. For most of these children, this was the closest they had ever been to a Torah in their lives. And so that weekly Sudat Shlishit became really important and meaningful to them. Afterwards, we would go downstairs and have a little food, nothing too elaborate. Egg salad, tuna, and that's it. But we sang songs, and that was a time, a safe space, where the children could come in when the shul was quiet. There weren't a lot of other programs going in, and that was their space to just be. Let's talk about parents for one moment. Many synagogues have a no parents rule. and rightfully so, when they talk about youth groups. If the parents want to join, they can go to Tat Shabbat, but parents are not welcome in the older groups. I get it. I actually even think that rule is pretty important. Having a lot of parents in the room can be distracting for the children, as we've talked about earlier. And when every parent says, I just need to stay with my child to help them transition, then you end up with 10 parents in the room not paying attention to their child, but all chatting with each other. And that can ruin your program. So the no parents rule is important, and you should be strict about it. However, you should always, always, always have an opt-out or an option to create a special transition program. So when you say no parents allowed, or if you say children only, which is a nicer way of phrasing it, also say, and any parent who needs extra time to transition with their child, or any parent with a child that needs them in there or would like them to be in there, should contact the youth director during the week. In this way, you're not dealing with it on Shabbat morning. That's not the time to have to start wondering if this parent should be in the room, if they shouldn't be in the room, trying to explain to them how to be in the room. Deal with it in advance during the week. And make sure that the parent understands exactly what to do. So, when they walk into the room, they shouldn't ever be sitting there and talking with the youth group leaders or other parents who may be dropping off their child. And if they continue to do so, they forego the privilege of being in the group with their child. However, let them walk into the room and give them a role. Maybe make them a group parent, which is great for you. Have them welcome other children to the door. Have them talk up your youth groups during the week. Hey, did you know I'm in there every week and that group is so fantastic? And have them invite their friends and their friends' children to youth groups. Then, while they're in the classroom, let them have a specific job. Let them be in charge of giving out the snacks, of assisting the leader during tefillah time. Whatever it is, don't just have them sitting there being a distracting presence. Even just their body on the periphery of the room is distracting. Rather, if they feel that they need to be in there to provide attention to their child, and you agree, then bring them in but give them a role so that everybody benefits. And instead of viewing the parent as a hindrance, find a way that they can be a help. For some parents, they don't need to be in the room. Maybe they just need to sit outside the door so that their child can always peek out and see that the parent is right there. For other children, they need their parent there for a week or two, and you can decrease the amount of time that the parent's in the room. Children without special needs need this transition too, especially if they're just starting youth groups. So make sure this transition time is available, but make sure that it's not something parents take on their own, but they meet with you to discuss it first. We've tossed around a lot of ideas here. The answer is not to go ahead and implement every single idea all at once, but rather to commit to making a change, small or large, to just start. Creating a culture of inclusion takes time, effort, and buy-in. But youth directors are in a unique position to start the dialogue and begin the implementation. For how can we, in good conscience, program for the masses, but exclude an entire subgroup of children? We need to make sure that every single child has a place, not just in our hearts, but actually, physically, in our communities. Ultimately, the effort you invest in inclusion will repay you tenfold in the satisfaction you get from seeing every child included, but also because in so doing, the quality of your program will increase and you will gain a shem tov, a good reputation in your community and beyond. This webinar is dedicated to the families with children with special needs in my community whose resilience is inspiring to me on a daily basis. Everything I know about this topic, I owe to you. Thank you.